Let me say something that might sting a little, but also set you free. We have confused kindness with approval. We've mistaken niceness for courage. And we've taught ourselves that being kind to everyone all the time, no matter what, makes us good people. But I'm going to challenge that. Stop being kind to everyone. Because the truth is, kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-betrayal. We tell ourselves that we're just being nice, but deep down, we're exhausted. We're resentful. We're boiling underneath because we're smiling on the outside while abandoning ourselves on the inside. That's not kindness. That's performance. And when we do it long enough, we lose track of who we are. We become experts in what other people need, but total strangers to our own truth. We get applause for being so helpful, so accommodating, but no one sees the emotional debt we've racked up trying to be everything for everyone. Here's the real deal. Kindness without truth is manipulation. Kindness without courage is cowardice. And kindness without boundaries, that's a ticking time bomb. You don't owe everyone your kindness. You owe yourself your integrity. You owe yourself a seat at the table of your own life. So, no, don't be kind to everyone. Be kind to people who respect your no. Be kind to people who see your value without needing you to shrink. Be kind to people who meet you at the level of honesty and respect you're brave enough to live out loud. Because fake kindness, it's a prison. But real kindness, the kind that's grounded in truth, courage, and boundaries, that's liberation. We live in a culture that rewards being agreeable, being easy, being the person who always says yes, who makes room, who smooths the edges, who bends instead of breaks. And we call it kindness. But what if I told you that what we've been calling kindness is, more often than not, something else entirely? That behind the polished smile, the nod of agreement, and the ever-present willingness to help is not genuine compassion, but something far more costly: self-abandonment. Self-abandonment is a quiet, soul-wearing erosion. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It creeps in every time we say it's fine when it's not. Every time we say sure when we mean I can't. Every time we put someone else's comfort above our own truth. We don't even notice it at first. It feels small, even noble. It feels like being a good person. But over time, those little betrayals pile up. And one day we wake up not quite knowing who we are anymore, only who we've needed to be for everyone else. Let me be clear. True kindness is powerful, it's healing, it's radical. But true kindness is never free of boundaries. In fact, boundaries are what make kindness real, because when we show up with kindness that's rooted in truth, in the courage to say what's okay and what's not okay, we are offering something authentic, something grounded. But when we show up with kindness that costs us our voice, our energy, or our peace, we are not being kind. We are being compliant. We are making ourselves smaller so that others can feel more comfortable. And that's not generosity, that's self-erasure. And here's what's really wild. Most of us learned this form of false kindness very young. We were told not to make a fuss, to be polite, to not hurt anyone's feelings, to be a good girl or a good boy. We were taught that our worth was tied to how well we made other people feel, so we got really good at smiling through discomfort, at pushing down our own needs, at disappearing in service of other people's expectations. And now, as adults, we carry those same scripts into our relationships, our workplaces, our parenting, our friendships. We carry the belief that kindness means silence, that love means over-functioning, that connection means constant sacrifice. But here's the paradox. The more we perform this empty kindness, the more we actually disconnect, not just from ourselves, but from the people we're trying to connect with. Because real connection can't happen when one person is constantly shape-shifting to keep the peace. That's not connection. That's codependency. That's emotional contortion. And eventually, the resentment builds. The exhaustion sets in. We start to dread the people we once loved showing up for, not because they changed, but because we've stretched ourselves so thin we're about to snap. What would it look like to stop doing that? What would it look like to offer kindness that doesn't come at the expense of your well-being? It might look like saying no without apology. It might look like letting someone down and trusting that their disappointment isn't yours to manage. It might look like letting go of the need to be liked in favor of being known. It might look like honoring your own needs with the same tenderness you offer to others. That's not selfish. That's integrity. That's what it means to belong to yourself. Kindness that includes boundaries is a revolutionary act. It says, I can love you and still choose me. It says, I will show up, but not at the cost of my mental health. It says, I care about you and I care about myself, and I'm no longer willing to make that an either/or. And here's the most beautiful part. When we model that kind of kindness, the kind that includes self-respect and limits, we actually give other people permission to do the same. We create a ripple effect of honesty, clarity, and real connection. We stop asking people to guess how we feel or to decipher our passive resentment. And we start creating relationships that can breathe under the weight of truth. So no, kindness without boundaries isn't noble, it isn't enlightened, and it sure as hell isn't sustainable. It's a slow unraveling of your own identity in the name of being nice. But you weren't born to be nice. You were born to be real. You were born to stand in your truth, not tiptoe around everyone else's. Stop calling it kindness when what it really is the fear of not being liked. Niceness can be a costume. It can be a polished, practiced version of ourselves we put on, not because it's who we are, but because it's who we think the world wants us to be. We smile, we nod, we agree when we don't, we stay quiet when we should speak, we give the safe response instead of the honest one. We do all of this not out of integrity, but out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being too much, or worse, not enough. And then we call it being nice. But really what we're doing is performing. The truth is, niceness is often armor. It's what we use to protect ourselves from discomfort, from vulnerability, from being misunderstood. It's the strategy we learned somewhere along the way that if we can just keep everyone happy, we'll be safe. If we can be pleasant, agreeable, helpful, unthreatening, then maybe we won't be judged, abandoned, or hurt. And let me tell you, that strategy often works. People like us were praised for being so accommodating, so easygoing, so nice. But there's a cost, and that cost is authenticity. When niceness becomes a strategy, we stop showing up as ourselves. We curate every interaction, filtering our words, our reactions, even our needs through the lens of what will make them comfortable. We read the room before we read our own bodies. We prioritize harmony over honesty. We edit ourselves down to a version that's likable, palatable, and inoffensive, but also incomplete. And while the world might be pleased with this version of us, it's not the version that builds real connection, because connection requires honesty, and honesty can't survive inside a performance. What's wild is how invisible this performance can become, not just to others, but to ourselves. We're so used to showing up with that filtered self that we don't even realize we're doing it. We think we're just being good people. We tell ourselves we're avoiding drama, but when we look deeper, we realize what we're actually avoiding is truth. We're avoiding the discomfort of being seen fully, of being known in ways that might make people turn away. And so we keep smiling, we keep nodding, we keep agreeing, we keep betraying ourselves in the name of being nice. But niceness is not the same as kindness. Niceness is about pleasing. Kindness is about honoring. Niceness is internally focused. It's about managing how others perceive us. Kindness is internally rooted. It's about living in alignment with our values. Niceness says, let me make sure you're okay, even if I'm not. Kindness says, I can care about you and still tell you the truth. One is a performance. The other is presence. One costs us our authenticity. The other requires it. And here's the painful part. Many of us learned to perform niceness because at some point it was necessary. It was how we stayed safe in environments where authenticity wasn't welcome. Where being too loud, too opinionated, too emotional, too real got us punished, dismissed, or ignored. Niceness became a survival skill. And there's no shame in that. But now, as adults, we have to ask ourselves, is this armor still protecting me? Or is it holding me back? Is it keeping me safe? Or is it keeping me small? What we need isn't more niceness. What we need is more courage. The courage to disappoint people in order to stay true to ourselves. The courage to speak the hard truths with love. The courage to say no without apology. The courage to let go of approval as the measure of our worth. Because when we stop performing niceness and start practicing authenticity, we don't become less kind. We become more whole. We stop living for applause and start living in integrity. We are so conditioned to equate kindness with selflessness that we rarely stop to ask ourselves what we're actually sacrificing. We show up for people, we give our time, our energy, our emotional labor, and we convince ourselves that this is love, this is service, this is what it means to be a good person. But here's what no one tells you. When you are constantly giving while consistently ignoring your own needs, it's not kindness, it's depletion. And depletion is not a virtue. It's a slow death of the self. There is a deep cultural narrative that glorifies martyrdom, especially for women. The idea that the more you give, the less you need, the more worthy you become. We wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. We say, I'm fine with a smile while we're falling apart. We convince ourselves that our needs are secondary, or worse, selfish. But the truth is, unmet needs don't disappear. They metastasize into resentment, into burnout, into disconnection. You cannot pour from an empty cup, no matter how hard you try or how noble your intentions. And here's the paradox. The more you deny your own needs, the more compromised your kindness becomes. At first, it looks like generosity. But over time, your yes starts to carry weight. Your giving becomes laced with quiet bitterness. You find yourself exhausted, maybe even a little angry, and you don't know why. You begin to dread the very people you once felt called to care for. And it's not because you're broken or mean or ungrateful. It's because your soul is waving a red flag, trying to tell you, I need care too. Kindness that costs you your well-being is not kindness. It's a bargain you never agreed to. A contract that says, I will show up for you endlessly, but you don't have to show up for me. That's not love. That's not friendship. That's not leadership. That's a one-sided agreement rooted in fear. The fear that if you have needs, you'll become a burden. That if you stop over-functioning, you'll stop being valuable. That if you say, I'm tired, someone might leave. So we keep giving, hoping you'll earn us belonging. But real belonging doesn't require you to disappear. Meeting your own needs is not selfish, it's responsible. It's the foundation of sustainable compassion. Because when your needs are acknowledged and respected by you first, your kindness becomes clean. It's not transactional. It's not performative. It's not driven by the hope that someone will finally notice you're drowning. It becomes an overflow, not an extraction. And that's where the magic happens. When kindness comes from a place of wholeness, not from the hollow ache of unmet needs. But to get there, you have to practice radical self-honesty. You have to stop pretending you're okay when you're not. You have to start telling the truth about what you need. Rest, help, space, connection, boundaries. You have to give yourself the same compassion you so effortlessly offer to others. And that's hard because most of us were taught that needing something, anything, makes us weak or needy or dramatic. But you are not too much. You're not a burden. You're a human being with a nervous system, with limits, with a body that needs rest and a heart that needs care. When you begin to honor your own needs, your entire experience of kindness changes. You stop giving to be seen and start giving from a place of grounded love. You stop chasing approval and start choosing alignment. You stop leaking energy in 1,000 directions and start living in a way that's rooted, deliberate, and alive. Kindness no longer feels like a duty. It feels like a choice. And that's when it becomes real. That's when it becomes powerful. There's a version of kindness we've been taught that looks a lot like shrinking. We're told that to be kind, we have to make ourselves small. Don't challenge. Don't disrupt. Don't question. Just go along. Keep the peace. Keep your opinions soft. Tuck away your anger. Swallow your truth. And do it all with a smile. But that's not kindness. That's compliance. That's surrendering your voice for the illusion of harmony. And it doesn't serve you, and it doesn't serve anyone else. Real kindness, it's gutsy, it's honest, it's bold. It requires standing your ground when it would be easier to back down. It means having hard conversations, not because you want conflict, but because you care enough to risk discomfort for the sake of clarity. That's the difference. Compliance avoids discomfort at all costs. Courageous kindness walks into discomfort with open hands, saying, this matters enough to tell the truth. It doesn't settle for polite silence when truth could lead to healing. It doesn't wear a mask to be accepted. It shows up fully. One of the most dangerous myths we carry is the idea that being kind means being agreeable. But here's the thing. Sometimes kindness is saying the hard thing. Sometimes it's drawing a boundary that makes someone uncomfortable. Sometimes it's calling out behavior that's harmful, even when your voice shakes. True kindness doesn't mean avoiding conflict. It means showing up with integrity in the middle of it. It means refusing to let fear be the loudest voice in the room. It takes courage to be kind in this way, because people may not always receive it as kindness. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is say no, and people won't like it. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is tell someone their actions are hurting you, and they'll push back. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is walk away, and they'll call you selfish. That's why we need courage, because kindness that's rooted in truth won't always be understood. And we have to learn how to be okay with being misunderstood when we're standing in our values. This kind of kindness disrupts systems. It calls out manipulation. It dismantles toxic expectations. Because when you're no longer willing to comply in order to be liked, you start telling the truth about who you are, what you need, and what you will no longer tolerate. That kind of honesty is contagious. It gives people around you permission to step into their own courage. But it starts with you choosing something more real than approval, choosing integrity. We have to stop praising people for being so nice, when what we're really admiring is their ability to suppress their own truth. That's not admirable. That's a trauma response. That's someone who's learned that keeping the peace is safer than telling the truth. And yes, there may have been a time in life when that strategy was necessary, when silence and compliance were survival. But now we're grown. Now we're responsible for our healing. Now we get to choose courage instead. And here's the most beautiful part. The more you practice this kind of brave, truth-based kindness, the more you build a life that can hold you. The more you attract relationships where you don't have to perform or pretend. The more your presence becomes an invitation, not just for comfort, but for truth, depth, and mutual respect. Kindness isn't about being the easiest person in the room. It's about being the most grounded, the most honest, the most willing to hold space for love and boundaries in the same breath. We don't talk about boundaries enough when we talk about kindness. We talk about compassion, empathy, patience, all the soft words. But boundaries, that word makes people nervous. It sounds like a wall, like distance, like saying no. And that's exactly why it's so misunderstood. Because the truth is, boundaries aren't barriers to kindness. They're what make kindness sustainable. Without them, what we call kindness is just exhaustion in disguise. When we don't have boundaries, kindness becomes something we owe people. It becomes an expectation, not a gift. We smile when we're overwhelmed. We agree when we're overbooked. We keep giving when we are dangerously low. And in the process, we teach people that our love, our time, our energy, it's endlessly available without limits. But here's the truth that changed everything for me. People don't respect unlimited access. People respect clarity. People respect people who respect themselves. Boundaries are not about keeping people out. They're about staying connected to ourselves. They are how we protect our energy, our values, our emotional safety. They're how we say, this is what's okay for me, and this is what's not. And when we're clear on that, we show up with a presence that's rooted, not resentful. We give because we want to, not because we feel obligated. We listen deeply because we have the capacity to, not because we're ignoring our own exhaustion. That kind of kindness is powerful. That kind of kindness has longevity. There's this lie that boundaries push people away. But I've learned the opposite is true. When you set clear, compassionate boundaries, you create a space where people can trust you. They know where they stand. They don't have to guess if you're okay. They don't have to walk on eggshells. Boundaries remove the fog from our relationships. They bring honesty. And with honesty comes intimacy. You cannot have true connection without boundaries. Without them, everything becomes performative. Everything becomes a guessing game. And let's be honest, many of us struggle with boundaries because we don't want to seem mean. We're afraid of disappointing people, afraid they'll think we don't care. But here's the reality. You can care deeply and still say no. You can love someone and still protect your time. You can be a good person and still choose yourself. Setting a boundary doesn't make you cruel, it makes you clear, and clarity is kindness. When you are clear, people can trust you. When you are unclear, they question your motives, your sincerity, even your love. What I've seen over and over in my research, in my own life, in conversations with people across the world is that when we don't have boundaries, we don't feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, we can't truly give. We can't truly connect. We're operating from survival mode, people pleasing, avoiding conflict, anticipating needs we've never been asked to meet. And that isn't kindness. That's control. It's fear wearing a smile. Boundaries break that cycle. They bring us back to self-trust. They remind us that we don't have to abandon ourselves to be loved. Boundaries aren't just about protecting ourselves from others. They're also about protecting others from the version of us that emerges when we've pushed too far, the tired version, the irritable version, the one that says yes but means no. That version doesn't serve anyone. But when we learn to hold ourselves with respect, when we stop seeing boundaries as rejection and start seeing them as relationship tools, we reclaim our ability to love with our whole hearts, not just the parts we think are acceptable. We like to think of kindness as inherently good. And in its truest form, it is. But what we don't often realize is that kindness can be distorted. It can be weaponized, not by others, but by us. We can use kindness as a shield, as a tool to bypass difficult conversations, as a socially acceptable way to avoid discomfort. And when that happens, when we start using kindness as a strategy to avoid conflict, it stops being kindness. It becomes self-protection in disguise. So many of us grew up equating conflict with danger. Maybe we were punished for speaking up. Maybe our honesty was met with silence or withdrawal. Maybe love was withdrawn when we pushed back. And so we learned, if I just keep things smooth, if I stay agreeable, if I don't rock the boat, I'll stay safe. We confused safety with silence, and we began to use kindness not as an expression of connection, but as a way to avoid confrontation. We traded truth for peace, even if that peace was fake. But avoiding conflict doesn't actually preserve peace. It delays the inevitable. The resentment builds, the misunderstanding grows, and all the things we were too kind to say begin leaking out in passive aggression, quiet withdrawal, or emotional distance. We think we're being kind by not saying what's hard, but here's the truth. Unspoken truth never disappears. It festers, and what was once a simple need or boundary turns into frustration, bitterness, even rupture. That's not kindness. That's emotional landmines waiting to go off. Real kindness, the kind that transforms relationships, is built on truth. Not comfort, not compliance, not people-pleasing. Truth. And truth often invites conflict, not chaos, not cruelty, just the kind of tension that arises when two people are willing to say, this is how I really feel. That kind of conflict isn't a threat to connection. It's a bridge to deeper understanding, but only if we're willing to stop using kindness as a mask and start using our voices with courage and clarity. It's important to say this: kindness and conflict are not opposites. In fact, kindness that avoids all conflict isn't really kindness at all. It's accommodation. And accommodation without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. It teaches people that we don't have limits, that we're okay with being overlooked or overburdened. And over time, that erodes our sense of self. It breaks the trust we have with ourselves because deep down, we know we're not being honest, we're just being agreeable. What takes real strength is saying something kind and true, especially when you know it might be hard to hear. It takes courage to look someone you love in the eye and say, I need to talk about something that's been bothering me. It takes self-respect to say, I care about us enough to be uncomfortable. And it takes integrity to hold space for both kindness and truth without collapsing into guilt or retreating into silence. That's where real connection happens, in the courageous space where we tell the truth and stay kind. When kindness is rooted in honesty, it becomes a powerful force, not because it avoids tension, but because it can hold tension without losing its humanity. It creates space for accountability without shame. It creates room for change without condemnation. It invites growth, not perfection, but it only works if we're brave enough to stop using kindness as a way to escape hard conversations and start seeing it as a way to enter them with open hearts and grounded feet. So let's stop mistaking kindness for approval seeking. Let's stop shrinking ourselves to be palatable. Let's stop calling it compassion when it's really compliance. Kindness, real, transformative kindness, is not about being liked by everyone. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about being grounded in your truth, even when your voice trembles. It's about choosing courage over comfort, connection over convenience, and integrity over image. Because at the end of the day, your life is too sacred, your energy too precious, and your voice too important to waste on being nice at the cost of being real. You were not put here to be everyone's soft place to land while you carry the weight of the world alone. You were put here to live fully, love bravely, and lead with a kind of strength that doesn't require you to disappear. So yes, be kind, but let it be the kind of kindness that tells the truth, the kind that sets boundaries, the kind that says no when your body says no, the kind that stands tall even when it would be easier to stay quiet. Because that's not just kindness, that's liberation. We like to think of kindness as inherently good, and in its truest form, it is. But what we don't often realize is that kindness can be distorted. It can be weaponized, not by others, but by us. We can use kindness as a shield, as a tool to bypass difficult conversations, as a tool to avoid discomfort. And when that happens, when we start using kindness as a strategy to avoid conflict, it stops being kindness. It becomes self-protection in disguise. So many of us grew up equating conflict with danger. Maybe we were punished for speaking up. Maybe our honesty was met with silence or withdrawal. Maybe love was withdrawn when we pushed back. And so we learned, if I just keep things smooth, if I stay agreeable, if I don't rock the boat, I'll stay safe. We confused safety with silence. And we began to use kindness not as an expression of connection, but as a way to avoid confrontation. We traded truth for peace, even if that peace was fake. But avoiding conflict doesn't actually preserve peace. It delays the inevitable. The resentment builds, the misunderstanding grows, and all the things we were too kind to say began leaking out in passive aggression, quiet withdrawal, or emotional distance. We think we're being kind by not saying what's hard, but here's the truth. Unspoken truth never disappears, it festers. And what was once a simple need or boundary turns into frustration, bitterness, even rupture. That's not kindness. That's emotional landmines waiting to go off. Real kindness, the kind that transforms relationships, is built on truth, not comfort, not compliance, not people-pleasing. Truth. And truth often invites conflict, not chaos, not cruelty, just the kind of tension that arises when two people are willing to say, "This is how I really feel." That kind of conflict isn't a threat to connection. It's a bridge to deeper understanding. But only if we're willing to stop using kindness as a mask and start using our voices with courage and clarity. It's important to say this: kindness and conflict are not opposites. In fact, kindness that avoids all conflict isn't really kindness at all. It's accommodation. And accommodation without boundaries turns into self-abandonment. It teaches people that we don't have limits, that we're okay with being overlooked or overburdened. And over time, that erodes our sense of self. It breaks the trust we have with ourselves. Because deep down, we know we're not being honest. We're just being agreeable. What takes real strength is saying something kind and true, especially when you know it might be hard to hear. It takes courage to look someone you love in the eye and say, "I need to talk about something that's been bothering me." It takes self-respect to say, "I care about us enough to be uncomfortable." And it takes integrity to hold space for both kindness and truth without collapsing into guilt or retreating into silence. That's where real connection happens, in the courageous space where we tell the truth and stay kind. When kindness is rooted in honesty, it becomes a powerful force. Not because it avoids tension, but because it can hold tension without losing its humanity. It creates space for accountability without shame. It creates room for change without condemnation. It invites growth, not perfection. But it only works if we're brave enough to stop using kindness as a way to escape hard conversations and start seeing it as a way to enter them with open hearts and grounded feet. So let's stop mistaking kindness for approval seeking. Let's stop shrinking ourselves to be palatable. Let's stop calling it compassion when it's really compliance. Kindness, real, transformative kindness, is not about being liked by everyone. It's about being honest with yourself. It's about being grounded in your truth, even when your voice trembles. It's about choosing courage over comfort, connection over convenience, and integrity over image. Because at the end of the day, your life is too sacred, your energy too precious, and your voice too important to waste on being nice at the cost of being real. You are not put here to be everyone's soft place to land while you carry the weight of the world alone. You are put here to live fully, love bravely, and lead with a kind of strength that doesn't require you to disappear. So yes, be kind, but let it be the kind of kindness that tells the truth. The kind that sets boundaries, the kind that says no when your body says no, the kind that stands tall even when it would be easier to stay quiet. Because that's not just kindness, that's liberation.